Good afternoon, students. It's day 13 of lockdown 2020. Crazy times that we're living in, and I hope you're doing well today and you're taking it one step at a time. We're more than halfway. Hopefully, lockdown won't be extended, um, but yes, let's keep taking one day at a time, one topic at a time, one subject at a time. Just one step at a time. Don't overwhelm yourselves too much. So today we're still looking at globalisation. We're going to look at the arguments in favour of protectionism, the arguments in favour of free trade, and then also what is the desirable mix. So what elements of protection should we employ and what elements of free trade should we employ and why. We're nearly done with the topic. But today's lesson, mostly arguments in favour are dealt with in paragraph questions, and then the desirable mix is dealt with in shorter questions. So just read through those and understand them. So firstly, arguments in favour of protectionism. I would say learn 4 of these. What you can see displayed is obviously your main headings, and learn 4 of the main headings with a proper explanation, and you shouldn't be caught out in a test or exam. They generally ask this in section B in the 8-mark questions. The way they generally ask it is to say, explain why the Minister of Finance should employ a strategy of free trade rather than protectionism. Then you would discuss the arguments in favour of free trade or vice versa. So, looking at protectionism, why would we want protectionism? Remember, these are closely linked to your advantages of protectionism. So, first of all, industrial development, which means that we are developing all our industries, so learning to produce goods for our own consumption rather than relying on other countries. Also, if we look at our infant industries, our infant industries, remember an infant is a small child. So infant industries, when they are protected, at least it gives them time to grow and time to develop. They're protected from the larger companies which have been established for a long time, which then means that it gives them a fair chance to survive once they've been through those first initial difficult stages. We also must consider that protectionism is necessary in terms of protecting the local businesses. By protecting the local businesses, you're also protecting the local workers. In what ways? By protecting their wage levels, the amount that they're going to be paid, and therefore their standard of living. Protectionism will also lead to increased employment. So obviously the local businesses are producing more, and that means they will require more workers. Our economy will also become self-sufficient, meaning that we become less dependent on other countries, especially key industries. Protectionism also has a way of preventing dumping. So dumping is selling goods in another country or foreign country at a price much lower than its cost. By stopping certain imports coming in, it obviously means that this will not be possible. There will also be stable exchange rates and balance of payments, because imports obviously are subject to certain tariffs and quotas, and that pushes the prices up. And lastly, the protection of natural resources. So certain countries will not be sharing their natural resources with the whole world, and therefore they should last longer. If we look at our arguments in favour of free trade, so free trade implies that there's no restrictions on trading. Obviously, specialisation, so that world production will increase as soon as a country specialises. Free trade gives the opportunity to specialise. Also, those businesses, once they're producing more, we experience what we call economies of scale. So, unit costs to produce each product is less. It can also lead to increased choice or increased welfare for the citizens. It will force businesses to follow their best practices or to innovate to become the best at producing what they are or the cheapest at producing what they are. Free trade will also allow for improved international relations. So not only will a country who's trading with the rest of the world experience new products, but also an integration of knowledge and the way that businesses are run. And in times like these, like we're experiencing a worldwide pandemic, the South African government is already in talks with our two biggest trading partners, Germany and China, in order to get the medical equipment and assistance that we might need. And then there's a more efficient distribution of resources possible. Why? Because each country is specializing in what they are mostly or what they are relatively good at. Therefore, the resources are utilized in a place that they are most efficiently used. Now, if we look at the desirable mix, so we're talking about how much free trade and how much protectionism should a country employ or adopt. So, standard speaking, we're saying that free trade is the best. That is the rule in theory. But we must also be aware that all countries impose some kind of restriction on trading to obviously protect their workers, to protect infant industries, to allow time for development, etc. The World Trade Organization is the institution that promotes free trade between countries. World Trade Organization. So, International Monetary Fund helps with balance of payments problems. World Trade Organization helps with promoting free trade. So, how do countries mix up import substitution and export promotion? So, industrialized countries, the countries, developed countries, they start off by protecting their infant industries, their domestic industries. So, the local businesses that are starting up, they are first protected by the government, given time to develop, and then once they are able to be self-sufficient, then the protectionism falls away. The next strategy that a government will adopt is to apply export promoting strategies. So once your infant industries are capable of satisfying local demand, after that they start trying to export to the rest of the world. Please remember that import substitution will lead to export promotion. So once a country starts by producing goods for themselves, they will eventually end up producing goods for themselves as well as the rest of the world. So some economies are not always successful in every industry or every product with import substitution. So they will continue importing goods, but other industries they will look at promoting exports. So most of the time a country will adopt what we call a dual strategy, meaning you're substituting imports and you're promoting exports. History has shown that countries who are more focused on export promotion, so outward looking policies, focusing on producing goods for overseas markets, are more successful than those that adopt import substitution. So, import substitution is not always the focus. Countries should rather focus on export promotion. When we look at protectionism and free trade, again, most countries have a mixture of both of them. So what they do is we have what we call regionalization, um, meaning there's free trade between a group of countries, but if you're not within that group of countries, then protectionist measures are um, applied. So there's member countries in the trade bloc, and there's free trade between them, but with non-member countries, there's protectionism applied. So there's two main types of trading blocs that you need to know the difference between. A free trade area, or an FTA, for example, NAFTA, or the North American Free Trade Area. There's no restrictions between the countries, and they are free to apply whatever trade restrictions they want on non-members. So there's no standard on what restrictions are placed on the non-member countries. A customs union, for example, Mercosur, um, there's no trade restrictions between the member countries, and all the member countries apply the same restrictions on the non-member countries. Common markets, economic unions, they have free trade and protection agreements similar to a customs union. It's important for you to know the free trade area and the customs union. Okay, so looking at globalization, what is globalization? Obviously, the main element of globalization is trade. It's an integration of countries within the world. It means we have what we call a global culture. So it's not like it was 30 or 40 years ago where every country was very different from the next. We see that our youth are listening to the same types of music, following the same types of fashion, eating the same kind of food. So, globalization is a worldwide movement of economic, financial, trade, and communication integration. Please remember that trade is the main element of globalization. Um, Obviously, protectionism um, and import substitution, it reduces the potential volume of world production. We want to enable countries to produce more and more. And as I said earlier, the World Trade Organization is the independent facilitator that tries to achieve this objective of world trade. So it's in the world's best interests to have free trade, and so there's an external party called the World Trade Organization that tries to make sure that countries are being fair to us. So just having a quick look at the World Trade Organization. Was developed after the Second World War, and obviously for the greater good. So the four main functions of the World Trade Organization, it's quite often asked in shorter questions. The administration and implementation of trade agreements. They act as a forum for trade negotiations. They resolve trade disputes, and they supervise the development of national trade policies. So we also have what we call the General Agreement on Tariffs and Trade. And with the World Trade Organization and GATT, the aim was to make trade more free and more affordable for all the countries. So when we talk about trade liberalisation, there are two main operating principles of the World Trade Organization. So the way that they come to their decisions is based on two principles. Reciprocity, so it means to reciprocate what you give for the one, or what you allow one country to give, you should give the same to that country. So if the USA reduces their tariffs to South Africa, South Africa should do the same for theirs. And the second principle is the most favored nation rule, meaning what you give to your favorite country, the conditions you afford them, you should be affording to all its suppliers. So if you're giving China the lowest tariffs, that tariff should be given to all the countries in your trade agreements.